Hey, and welcome to this newest video. My name is Johan, and together with me is a very special guest. It's none other than Blair Parkhill from Login VSI. So, Blair, welcome.
Thanks, man.
How are you?
I'm good. Been waiting to do something like this with you for a while.
Yeah. So, we're going to talk about something special right now. But
Yeah.
before we do, Blair, you're with Login VSI. You've been there for pretty much, I don't know,
I'm
10,
the OG.
7, 8, 9, 10
OG.
years?
Nine to 10 years. Let's see.
Wow.
This will be my 10th year in July, I think.
Wow. So what's
Yeah.
your current role within Login VSI?
Oh man. Jack of all trades, but no, Director of Technology Alliances is kind of the title. But we've got a couple different kinds of customers at Login VSI. We've got vendors who are technology vendors in the world of VDI and IT, and then we have enterprises who are, our Fortune, 100 customers and beyond. The kind that we partner up with together. Us and ITQ to serve them. So Director of Technology Alliance is just focused on the vendors. So I get the distinct pleasure of being able to work with, Omnissa, VMware, Microsoft, Citrix, you name it, just all the big players in this world. So yeah, had a lot of fun. I've been focusing a little on the GPU stuff lately too with these guys, which I think we might
Great
talk about.
segue. Yeah. So one of the partners that you've been working with as well is NVIDIA.
That's right.
And in this video, we're going to basically cover one of your latest projects, the one that's launching this week.
That's right.
Let's dive into it. So what is it that we're going to talk about in this video and that you're going to launch this week?
So, I mean, just what I'd love to talk about, in general is just the world of GPUs, because that's changed a lot over the last, 8 years or so, maybe even, up to 10 years or so, especially in the world of VDI. But yeah, the project that I've been having a lot of fun with working with NVIDIA on is called nVector. So it's Login Enterprise powered by nVector, NVIDIA nVector. And it's mashing up some cool technology that they have with the cool technology that we have to be able to characterize kind of the experience of running in a VDI environment with GPUs. So, in short, that's kind of what we've been playing with lately. But what it delivers, what it offers is kind of the fun stuff that we can get into as well.
Let's do that.
But, yeah.
nVector. For the people listening, nVector has been around for a while, but kind of was a consultative tool, if you will. Never kind of made the public in a way that was highly scalable. That's probably because of this thing, right?
Yeah. Yep. Little tie-ons that.
So people watching the recording, this little thing is an LDAT. It's a measuring device that has a photonic sensor in it. So you basically, a tiny camera, you put this around a display and the thing starts recording stuff. And nVector basically picks up those recordings and calculates something that we call a click to photon metric.
Yeah.
So basically the latency between a frame being sent and a frame being received, right?
Yeah, well, there's also the click involved too, right? So the click initiates the change, and then how long does it take for the photon on that photodiode to change, right? Very scientific, very cool from a display perspective, but scalable, not so much, right? And so, yeah, nVector has been, it's basically NVIDIA allowing us to have access to some more ways to measure the performance of GPUs or graphics, basically in any environment. VDI is where we focus, but there are things like this nVector agent, which we'll talk about. There are also things like SSIM. I'm not sure if you're familiar with SSIM or not, but that's a kind of a structural similarity index. a lot of words for basically how different is a frame or is a picture at the remote side versus the picture that is being displayed at the desktop, right? If you're playing a video, there's going to be compression and a lot of other things that cause that image to change. So SSIM is just a way to measure how different that picture at a point in time really is. So there's a lot of things that nVector does that NVIDIA has built into their nVector tool. But we're taking one of the coolest pieces from it, which is the nVector agent, which we could talk about. But yeah, it's just them handing over some really cool technology that we can integrate into Login Enterprise.
So why? Because Login Enterprise was already able to collect certain GPU related information.
Right. That's right.
So what makes this different? And why is that click to photon metric or the additional metrics that we now can collect with nVector inside Login Enterprise, what's different there?
Yep. No, that's a good question. So yeah, we know Login Enterprise, or those of you that don't know what Login Enterprise is, basically just an automation tool that simulates virtual users or users logging into a virtual environment and running a workload. So that could be applications, ChipSoft, for example, or other types of applications that businesses are running. And our virtual users will log in and use those applications and stress the system out so that we can find where the scalability limits are, right? So if you take what we're really good at, which is that virtual user automation, login storms, run times, all that good stuff, and you take these important pieces from NVIDIA, then what we're adding, what's making this unique, number one, is the ability to characterize the user experience from the remote client perspective. So we've always been able to look at things at the target desktop. How are things running on the VM itself? But if I take myself out to the client where I could be far removed from the data center, what is that experience like? When I click a button, how long does it take for the image to change? And so it's a valuable type of performance metric if you're trying to characterize what is that user experience like when it's far away from the data center. And so we have customers, for example, that are doing engineering, like lots of CAD or media and entertainment, things like that. And if I want my data to be close to my desktop, then that's great. I'm going to do all of that in the data center. But if that remote experience is very laggy, then my engineers, my creative types aren't going to be able to have a good experience doing what they're doing, and they're going to say, "Hey, I'm done with this VDI thing. Bring me back my my $5,000 workstation that can keep my office hot, and I want to download all the data, my local box, all that stuff that just isn't working so much anymore." But if we can kind of understand what that remote experience is like, then it helps us to make sure that we can optimize so that they always have a great experience. So that's what this unique part is, this nVector agent. And kind of like the measurement device that you just showed us, instead of a click to photon, right, where you're capturing a photon coming into that photo eye, what we're calling this is kind of like a click to pixel change. So we're not quite as precise as a photon, but we're talking like, milliseconds here of difference where you and I might not be able to feel that. So this click to pixel change, it does just what you were saying. When I click the button, I want to know how long does it take for that input to be received, and then for the graphic to have to be decoded or encoded, right? And then decoded at the client side. So that whole round trip with all of the encoding and everything that happens is going to cause some delay. And the more work that you put on the system, the slower that encoding and decoding is going to be, and the longer it's going to take for that pixel to change. So what the nVector agent is basically that click to pixel change timing, end user latency kind of thing at the remote side. So as far as I know, there's really no way to do that at scale in the market today. So that's something unique that we bring. And like you said, there are other tools that can do it, not quite at scale, which are very good. Benny's somebody that has, made a profession out of this. He's very good at that.
Benny Trich.
But we need,
yeah.
Yes, that's right. And so he's, so this technology just allows us to do something like that at scale, a little less precision, but it gives us enough information to know, do I need to alter something? Do I need to improve the performance by optimizing things like that? And that's the world that it's kind of opened us up to.
Yeah, and to elaborate a little bit on that, the reason why it now works at scale is that we don't have to put a device with an eye attached to a USB port on every single monitor you have in your estate.
Right.
And every single different use case that you might have or different context. Right. So that's one. Second thing I definitely want to dive a bit deeper in as well is why is Login Enterprise the perfect solution to integrate nVector in? Because in a previous situation, you would add this device to a monitor with a local client installed, and you then start recording things. So how does Login Enterprise solve or fill that client or that endpoint and that server side difference in?
Yep. Yeah, I think, from a Login Enterprise perspective, we have, I'd say, kind of control over what we call a launcher. In the Omnissa world, that would be the Horizon client. That would be where the Horizon client runs. We also have control over the target, the desktop that's running all the apps that lives in the data center. So, when you have control of those two things, you can not only automate the performance testing of it, but you can set them up to be exactly how you want them to be, right? So if I have a launcher that's out there in my test environment and a desktop that's out there in my test environment, the cool thing that Login Enterprise can do is say, hey, launcher, prepare for this kind of test. I want you to run the nVector agent in what we call client mode, which means it's going to look for the pixel to change. And then we can say, okay, now that you're ready to start doing this type of testing, now I'm going to fire off a job. And when we log into the target or the desktop, we can put the agent that runs on the desktop in target mode. And so all of that is automated, right? You don't have to pre-install anything on the target side, right? So you've got your golden image VM that's running. We log into that VM with a startup script. And as soon as that startup script fires off, it pulls down all the nVector bits. It pulls down the applications that you wanted to run, the scripts that you wanted to run, and it knows what it's supposed to collect during that time. So at runtime, we get everything we need, run it, and then when it's done, we clean up, right? Everything's in temp. So when you log off, go ahead, destroy the VM, recompose it, do whatever you want. There's nothing on that VM that's persistent from us, no agents or anything like that. So, being able to run a test and not affect the desktop too much by installing a bunch of other things is important in a scientific experiment, right? So that's where it's very different. It also is built to run in the cloud. And, not just public cloud, but private and hybrid and all this stuff, right? So, if you have a directory and all of these other things, we kind of mesh pretty seamlessly with all of that. So if you've got a production environment you want to test, we're built to do that. And I think if you look at other, software packages and things like that, where you want to do this level of testing in an enterprise, it's hard to build it in a way where it could be consumed by an enterprise and not kind of trigger a bunch of red flags or have its own kind of directory structure. Those kind of things are important because they affect the performance that you're going to get. So that's where the Login Enterprise thing comes in very handy and is pretty unique.
Now, when we used nVector before, from a consultative approach,
yes,
brought in the LDAT device, I would say the main use case we used it for was, for instance, to determine what the impact of a GPU was end to end in a connection. So we work with customers that, for instance, had developers in India, data center is somewhere in Europe. You ship the LDAT device because for certain, like if they start complaining about performance, quite often we do know what the issue is that we need to solve, but quite often also it's something that's immeasurable by the metrics that we already had. So you ship the LDAT device, you start measuring and collect the information, and quite often you can then already kind of recommend customers what change to make, like buy a GPU or get rid of a traditional VPN or stuff like that.
Yes.
Now that was kind of the main use case we used it for, but looking at Login Enterprise and the different use cases it can help us with, like continuous testing, testing at scale, testing the impact of a change of an application or a base image.
That's right.
How does the integration of nVector contribute to or support the already known use cases around the things that we could do with the Login Enterprise before? So does nVector add something to those use cases?
It does, and I think it's important to kind of characterize nVector beyond just this agent that we've been talking about, right? That round trip graphical latency, click to pixel change kind of thing. nVector kind of goes a little bit beyond that, right? Because we've pulled that bit of software into our virtual user and what they do. But there are two other components to this that are really important. Number one is the application that you're going to use to kind of characterize what your end users are doing. You know just as well as I, if you're running something like Siemens NX, that's going to be very intensive from a compute perspective. So we need to be able to let that run as a workload, right? So nVector is, this agent, it's workloads that help to stress the system in a real way that allows us to make educated choices, things like that. And then there's the third thing, which are the metrics that we collect, right? I've worked with lots of engineers who collect hundreds of metrics, and will parse through those to figure out, okay, what correlates with that and what do I need to change? It's like, no, let's limit it to the things that are the most important, right? So nVector is also us working with NVIDIA to say, okay, let's just start with these base things: frame buffer utilization, memory utilization on the GPU and the system, CPU utilization, frame rate, frames per second. These are the kind of things, and then the nVector latency, right? You really don't need a lot beyond that to at least start to understand, where do I need to tweak and tune, right? One thing I always say is you cannot optimize what you cannot measure. Optimization isn't just about user experience. It's also about value, TCO. If I'm throwing too much GPU at something, I'm leaving a bunch on the table and I'm losing a lot of money that way, right? So if you combine the agent and the workload and the metrics that we're collecting, you can get the best of both worlds. You get the best end user experience, and you also get the best configuration for your GPU that allows you to use it as broadly as possible, because they're not cheap, and the systems that you're running them on are not cheap. So you need to be able to see all of those facets to be able to say, okay, let's give you this GPU profile, let's put it on this size VM, and then as we run it, then we know we've got the right configuration that gives us the best value and the best user experience. That finding that sweet spot is not necessarily intuitive, especially when it comes to GPUs, right? I mean, when you look at how GPUs run, it's funny. We used to have people that would say, I added a GPU to my system and my CPU is being used even more. The scalability I was looking for is not there. And it's like, okay, let's step back. That kind of seems counterintuitive, but if you think about it, if my GPU is allowing my system to perform better, provide more frames per second at higher display resolutions, for every frame I'm processing, I still got to use more CPU. So it's about how much CPU am I using, but what is the experience I'm getting from it, right? Those are the two things that you've got to look for. In the 10 years ago, the history of GPUs, when we tried to do this in VDI, people were running them with general knowledge workers, and they were finding that the GPU just didn't do a whole lot for them, right? But 10 years ago, we weren't using browsers like we are now. We weren't using unified communications like we are now. We didn't have AI agents running all over our desktops like we do now, right? So these are the things that we get the ability to look at now, and to see just the benefits of a GPU. It's so cool to look at, to see how much benefit that you get for, I'd say, today's knowledge worker, not the basic knowledge worker, but the one I just explained, just a ton of value.
So I can imagine, especially looking at the benchmark and scalability test side of things, that this fully makes sense. Now, what about continuous testing? Yeah, is there added value for nVector there as well?
Totally. And I love that you asked that question, because we've already had 2 customers come to us, both in the aerospace engineering realm in that market. They have their data center located, let's just say, in the US. Yeah. They're trying to get there. They're simulating it. But yeah, they'll have a data center in the US, and their developers, maybe in Europe, or India, or, Singapore, who knows. And when it comes to things like continuous testing, if folks listening to this aren't familiar with what that is, it's, like in a load test, you have a virtual user that logs in, runs apps, and we load the system up to see, where it breaks. A continuous test is just taking one of those users as kind of like a sensor almost, where you want to kind of look at your production environment as kind of an IoT device, let's call it. And so what that one virtual user is going to do is log into that environment. Let's just say it's a Siemens NX environment. Virtual user is going to log into that environment. It's going to run through a workflow where it opens up a model, it spins a model, it shades a model, it can even render a model. And what we can do is do that every hour, every day, for weeks, for years, and see, if I'm doing that test at midnight for that user, maybe there's not a lot of things going on. So I see that responsiveness at that client side is really good. The graphical latency is really good because the systems aren't really being pushed. But let's just say during the day when everybody's logged in and really stressing the system, then I might see that latency increase, right? So it's important to understand that, at what point does latency increase and what causes that? Is it network, where my service provider for my networking isn't giving me the full bandwidth that I need, or maybe I've undersized that? Is it the systems that I'm using, the CPU is being overworked, therefore causing things like encoding to take longer? So a continuous test gives us a picture of what my production environment looks like over the span of 24 hours. And I can look at the peaks, right, where things are starting to slow down. And then I can dig into my infrastructure and say, okay, what's happening at this time slice? And I can look at my servers. I can look at the GPUs to see how are they being utilized so that I can, again, make optimizations that will help that user to be more productive. So yeah, continuous testing is just kind of like a sensor of your production environment that tells you, hey, things are slowing down, and we can trigger and create thresholds that will say, hey, if this graphical latency, this round trip latency is increasing above 150 milliseconds or whatever you choose, I want my operations folks to know so that they can dive in and see what's going on. So there's so many things you can do from that perspective. So that's, another thing we're excited about.
So what are some of the other kind of measurable or unmeasurable kind of benefits to the solution?
Mm-hmm. I think, everything needs to be measurable, I think, if you want to count it as a benefit. The thing that a lot of the technical folks like ourselves like to look at are things like frame rate. Awesome. You're getting amazing frame rate, 30, 60 frames per second, whatever it is. Awesome. But not everybody cares about that, right? The end user doesn't really care how many frames it is. They just want a very smooth and fluid experience. Our managers, the people that we have that give us funding to build our environments, they care about total cost of ownership. So for them, we just did an experiment recently where we had a pretty well outfitted desktop host, and we tried an experiment where we had 64 VMs that we could use with 2 A16 cards. And what we did was we used this knowledge worker I talked about earlier that runs Edge with Microsoft Edge. Edge is connecting to a streaming video. And in that streaming video, we can configure it for 30, 60 frames per second, 1080p, or 4K. And we can also configure monitors of a certain size. And once you get all of that, then you can start running these tests with and without GPU. So the question that we wanted to answer was a modern knowledge worker who's using Zoom, and they're also streaming video. What does that look like with and without a GPU? And as a standard knowledge worker without streaming video, without Zoom, you don't really need the GPU. But those knowledge workers, are kind of a thing of the past, right? Every day we're adding more browser tabs to our browsers, we're watching lots of video, and we're always doing things like Zoom. So when we added those two workloads to our user workflow, then what we saw was you could fit 32 of these users on this desktop host. And once you hit 32 users, you're at 100% CPU utilization. You can't add any more. But we added two A16 cards to this, and that same workload, we were able to double the number of users on that server. And when you look at the cost per user at 32 without the GPUs and 64 with the GPUs, you've suddenly offset the cost of adding the GPUs, and you've actually reduced the cost per user. Now, that's what management cares about. That's one of the benefits that a lot of times we don't think about in a technical realm. But if I want to get GPUs for my environment that I'm responsible for, then I need to bring a compelling case up to the people that make the decision. And this is the cool thing. Login Enterprise will simulate that. You could simulate it without GPU and with GPU. You get a report that clearly shows I got 64 of these users on this machine with a great user experience and 32 that just started to run dry. You hand it to them, that report, and it's very objective. Okay, I'll make a decision to buy those GPUs because it's clear to me, without a doubt, that it's a big benefit for us and it actually improves our TCO. So those are the additional benefits that you get beyond just the simulations and stuff that I think really help. There's one more benefit that we're seeing in the field, right? Because we work together with our enterprise accounts to help get them into a solution that works best for them. What we've seen is that when people add GPU, when organizations look to add GPU, they need to make this proof point to their upper management. And that is called a proof of concept. And that unfortunately takes a long period of time if you have to ask others to say, is this experience better? Is it worse or whatever? So the kind of this intrinsic benefit is that POCs don't take as long. I can prove without a doubt that I got the best, configuration and I'm getting the best value, and I can do that in half the amount of time that I would have to without being able to simulate this and rerun these tests and find the best config. So, lots of benefits.
So if customers want to get started with this, I mean, like deploying Login Enterprise by itself is not hard. It does take, some time and some effort to create, those automation scripts for applications, but the script recorder will definitely help with that. So hypothetically, a customer has set up Login Enterprise and wants to start adding those nVector metrics to the things that they're doing. How should they start?
All they have to do is get in touch with either ITQ or Login VSI, right? It's easy to engage either one of our companies. So that's the best place to start, right? If you have a project coming up, you can also engage with NVIDIA because of this partnership. If you say, hey, I heard about this nVector tool and I'd like to use it to help me arrive at a solution much faster. NVIDIA is also very familiar with this integration. They've been trained in their sales community. We've been trained in ours. So yeah, all they got to do is get in touch with us and let us know, hey, I've got a GPU solution that I'd like to, get tested. With the types of folks on all three sides, ITQ, Login VSI, and NVIDIA, As soon as you kind of raise that flag, you know you're going to get the best of breed coming at you to help you with that, right? So yeah, it's that easy. You can imagine, getting a solution architect and a product specialist from NVIDIA to jump right in to help you out. I know that we have some of the best VDI engineers in the industry working for Login VSI. They're going to be involved working in kind of a white glove fashion too with our customers that want to use nVector to do this characterization. And there's no doubt you guys from ITQ, know this well. So, if you get any one of us to jump in on this stuff as a customer, yeah, all you got to do is hit up sales@loginvsi.com or something like that. It's that easy.
So does it require additional licensing to enable this?
It does not. So if you're licensed for Login Enterprise, then you get nVector. Now we do have plans to build it into our virtual appliance, right? But at launch here this week, it is kind of a piece of software that our folks will help you kind of get installed on the virtual appliance. And once it's there, then everything's pretty straightforward and automatic. So, once you get the nVector agent, you push that onto the virtual appliance. We already have all the scripts built that you need. So there's really not much more you need to do than that. But at some point, we will have it built into the virtual appliance. All the session metrics and that kind of stuff, they'll be built in. So yeah, this is not a kind of a one-time deal. This is just a jumping off point. This is a launch, right? So looking forward to more.
So, Simon, are there any specific requirements, like hardware requirements? Does it require, for instance, to have a GPU at the launcher? Or could you kind of elaborate a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, yep. So the target itself, since there's a really strong and valid use case to compare GPU to non-GPU, or vGPU, I think is probably the most common that we'll see in this case with nVector. We want to be able to support that with and without a GPU on the desktop side, right? So, carving up a GPU into profiles and provisioning them to a virtual machine, that's a good use case, strong use case. So you don't have to have a GPU on the target VM. On the launcher or the client VM, you do have to have a GPU because it's what's running that nVector agent that's looking for that click to pixel change. So there does have to be a GPU on that side. And by the way, this is an nVector NVIDIA integration, right? So NVIDIA GPUs only, right? So yes, there's a requirement for a launcher to have a GPU, but the target does not. So plain and simple. Okay. So NVIDIA GPUs.
Yeah. So and obviously, like you mentioned, because you want to also determine what the difference is with or without GPU, so it perfectly makes sense to do that. So the local GPU needs to be a discrete one, and most of the new hardware that you can buy, even thin clients nowadays can have an NVIDIA chipset in there. So, okay, that's definitely also good to know. We know how easy the deployment is. So you already kind of shared a little bit of what's next, but can you kind of talk us a little bit through what's next for Login VSI, Login Enterprise, nVector, etc.? Sure.
Yeah. From an nVector perspective, I already talked about, let's just build it in, make it easier. That we do at Login VSI is about how do we make it easier? Just as well as I that VDI is complex, right? And when you have a tool set that helps to characterize that complex infrastructure, the tooling is gonna be a bit complex as well. So I think we've come a long way over the last 10 years from legacy VSI to Login Enterprise in making it easy, right? With virtual appliance deployment in less, 30 minutes, and being able to do workloads much faster with script recorder, that kind of stuff. So we'll always continue doing that. And with nVector, more of the same, right? So instead of having to create the session metrics that you're going to use to measure, like the perfmon statistics to measure the performance, we'll build that stuff in. The agent, we'll build it in so that it's already on the virtual appliance. So all you have to do is pick a script that's already located on the virtual appliance. that's part of the cool stuff. Workloads are something we're always going to continue to develop, right? So, we currently have a GPU reference workload, or GPU benchmark workload, sorry. The GPU benchmark workload leverages tooling like SpecViewPerf, right? SpecViewPerf has, a number of different view sets that can characterize things like Maya, 3ds, Siemens NX, SolidWorks, all that stuff. And we can use some of that engine to stress the target environment, right? So there's workload. We've got a great workload that will be available at launch for, like I mentioned, Microsoft Edge. You could probably do it on Chrome too, not a problem. But it will do a multi-tab and streaming video configuration. So you can have as many tabs as you want. It'll cycle through all the tabs. You can run the video as much as you want, right? So all of these things are definitely important. And then things like the Zoom, right? So like I mentioned, we did a test with Zoom. So if you want to run Zoom in your environment, you'd be surprised at how abusive Zoom is in VDI, right? Even though they have it kind of built for VDI, when you run a lot of users on a single server running Zoom, those are the kind of things that will really stress the environment. So, all of those workloads are workloads that we have developed already, but we'll continue to add more, especially, things like ChipSoft and some of these other things that we're kind of seeing in our enterprise environments. The one thing that you and I had talked about that was almost an identical use case was the telehealth, right?
Yeah.
Where, and maybe that's something you could kind of elaborate on a little bit too.
Yeah, definitely. What we're seeing, and I don't think it's just in our country, in the Netherlands, but we're seeing an increase of medical specialists doing patient appointments from home through Zoom or Teams. And what we're seeing is that a lot of EMR applications are now kind of deep linking into Teams and Zoom. So basically the medical specialist clicks on a patient, gets a button that says call the patient or jump into a call, and they just directly head into that appointment. We've seen in the past that customers are kind of depending or counting on an offload plugin to work. So imagine you run the EMR application from a virtual desktop. You don't have Zoom or Teams there, but you do have it on the endpoint. And there's an offloading plugin that basically redirects the channel, the video channel, the audio channel to the local endpoint. And that could work if your IT team is 100% in control over both the virtual desktop infrastructure as well as all of the endpoints.
Right.
And we've seen also happening an increase of, BYOD. And now suddenly someone like a medical specialist heads to Best Buy or the media market in our case, buys a laptop, enrolls it or does not enroll it, and still wants to run the EMR application in a secure way. So they do that, but they don't have the offloading plugin. And they have a bad user experience simply because the way it intended to use does not work anymore. So now we're seeing customers adding Teams and Zoom to the virtual desktop infrastructure. And like you mentioned earlier, without a GPU, that baby won't work. User experience is just awful, especially when scaling it up.
Right. Cost goes through the roof, right?
Yeah.
We've seen that as well. Department of Defense, federal types of programs, they just don't allow the offload plugins to work. WebRTC is an example, right? Where it's meant to be peer-to-peer. Let's offload it from the VDI server, but now you're putting sensitive video on an endpoint that you don't have control of. So it's, we see that benefit turned off for the sake of security, right? And again, GPUs are the answer to that. And to your point, it really has a measurable improvement in cost to add a GPU, which it's pretty amazing to be here nowadays saying add a GPU, it'll save you money. But it's true. We've proven it.
Now you can show it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
So one question I still have, because you triggered me on something. You mentioned that you can now add tabs to a browser.
Yeah. Huh?
Main question here. How many tabs have you tried opening up before the session broke down?
I haven't killed it yet. No,
Really?
I've only gone to 20. But where I'm looking things to break is how many users with 20 tabs, right?
Yeah.
I was doing a pretty lame test, but Azure, this stuff even works for Azure, right? So if you have an Azure enabled VM with a GPU and without a GPU, you can test, through the remote desktop client or the Windows app, right? And so, yeah, I have I think it's a 6 vCPU, I think it's an old Tesla, M60 kind of a device, but I could get like 3 or 4 virtual users at 20 tabs without GPU, and I could get, double that with GPU. So, yeah, but it is interesting, and I could easily type 100 in there. And when we fire off that script, it's going to pop open Edge with 100 tabs. It's going to give them as long as we want to let them load all those tabs, and then it's going to cycle through each one of them. But I bet you a login storm is going to be like a hurricane when you do that, right? Because the users will log in, open up Edge with all the tabs, and it's just going to crush it. So let's try that.
Yeah.
That might be an interesting topic for another day.
Oh man, looking forward to it. So Blair, before we end the conversation, anything we missed?
I don't think so. I think on the topic of GPUs and things like that, I think we in this program, right, this nVector program that we've been running, I think that's about it, man. I think in retrospect, after we kind of get off this call, we're probably going to be like, oh, so let's cache those, put them in a parking lot, and get back together another day, because this was a blast, man. I really enjoyed doing this.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to basically go through everything there's to announce this week. So first and foremost, congrats on the announcement.
Thanks, you.
If you have any questions or feedback about Login Enterprise, Login VSI as a whole, nVector, the integration between Login Enterprise and nVector, some of the use cases, how to get started. You can reach out to Login VSI. You can reach out to NVIDIA. There's a link below this video with additional information you can find on both our website as well as the one from Login VSI. For now, thanks so much for watching or listening, and we'll see you in the next video.